One country refines 83% of the world's tungsten, and in 2025, it quietly slammed the export door. That single move put every semiconductor plant on the planet on notice. It happened without a press conference, without a dramatic speech, just a technical notice buried in a customs bulletin. But inside the factories that make the chips running your phone, your car, and the servers behind everything online, engineers understood exactly what it meant. To understand why, you have to understand what tungsten actually is. It is the hardest, densest, most heat-resistant metal that industry uses at scale. It melts at over 3,000 degrees Celsius, higher than any other metal on Earth. That hardness is exactly why chip factories cannot live without it. The tools that shape silicon, the drill bits that carve microscopic holes, the cutting edges that slice wafers thinner than paper, are tipped with tungsten carbide. Nothing softer survives the job. But tungsten does not stop at the tooling. It goes inside the chip itself. In the tiny wiring that connects billions of transistors, tungsten forms the vertical plugs that link one layer of circuitry to the next. Take it away, and the chip simply does not work. So this one metal sits at two ends of the same process. It builds the machines that make chips, and it lives inside the finished product. That is a rare kind of dependency, and it is precisely what makes control over tungsten so powerful. Now follow the metal back to where it comes from. Tungsten begins as ore, mostly a mineral called wolframite, dug from hard rock deposits, and the overwhelming majority of the world's supply is concentrated in one place. China does not just mine most of the world's tungsten. It refines it. Turning raw ore into the pure metal powders and chemicals industry needs is a dirty, difficult chemical process, and decades ago China built the capacity to do it at a scale no one else matched. The rest of the world let that happen. Refining tungsten is polluting and low-margin work, so for years it was easier to buy the finished powder than to build the plants. Cheap supply looked like a bargain. It was actually a dependency, slowly hardening into a trap. For a long time, none of this mattered to anyone outside the industry. Tungsten was cheap, plentiful, and boring. It sat in the background of the supply chain like plumbing you never think about until the day the water stops. Then the water started to slow. As trade tensions between China and the United States escalated, Beijing began treating its dominance over critical minerals not as an accident of geology, but as an instrument of leverage. Tungsten was one of a growing list: gallium, germanium, graphite, rare earth magnets, and then tungsten. Each restriction was carefully aimed at a metal the West could not quickly replace, and each was announced as a matter of national security. The 2025 tungsten measures did not ban exports outright. Instead, they placed tungsten under a licensing regime, meaning every shipment now needs government approval. That sounds bureaucratic and small. In practice, it hands one government a valve it can tighten or open at will. For a chip manufacturer, uncertainty is almost as damaging as a shortage. A factory that runs continuously cannot afford to wonder whether next quarter's tungsten will clear an export desk in time. Buyers responded the only way they could, by scrambling to stockpile whatever they could get. Prices moved fast. Within months, tungsten and its key chemical compounds climbed sharply, and the ripple traveled far beyond chips. Tungsten also armors cutting tools across aerospace, automotive, and defense manufacturing, so the squeeze touched the whole industrial base at once. This is where the trap that had been slowly closing for decades finally shut. There were almost no alternative refineries to turn to. The West had let that capacity wither, and rebuilding it is not a matter of months. Building a new tungsten mine and refinery from scratch can take a decade, tangled in permits, environmental review, and the simple fact that the chemistry is hard and hazardous. You cannot conjure a supply chain overnight to answer a policy signed in an afternoon. So the response became a slow, expensive scramble. Governments in the United States, Europe, and elsewhere started funding new mining projects, dusting off old deposits, and offering guarantees to companies willing to take on the dirty work of refining once again. Recycling became urgent too. There is a surprising amount of tungsten already circulating inside worn cutting tools and scrap, and reclaiming it suddenly looked less like an environmental nicety and more like a strategic necessity. But the valve remained in one hand. Even as new projects broke ground, the reality was that for years to come, the fabs producing the world's most advanced chips would still depend on approvals stamped somewhere far outside their control. That is the quiet lesson buried in a customs bulletin. The most advanced technology humanity builds still rests on the least glamorous foundations, on rock, chemistry, and the patient decisions about who bothers to refine a difficult metal. For decades, the world treated tungsten as invisible plumbing. In 2025, one government reminded everyone that whoever controls the plumbing controls the whole building. And every chip factory on the planet is now designing around that single, unavoidable fact.
If you found this deep dive valuable, hit the like button, drop a comment below on what tech mystery we should decode next, and subscribe to never miss an episode.